Home Sweet Home Alone. Home Alone as a franchise has a major struggle trying to find its place in the current era. The original was a simple story about a kid being trapped home alone and he's besieged by burglars. Home Alone 2 is the evolution of that, which takes place throughout New York City. Then subsequent entries fell into varying levels of suckiness, attributing mainly to how they try to keep reviving the original's formula, even though the original did eventually move on from that. There's always going to be a kid home and alone. Even though some of these sequels, the kid is like home alone for like 5 minutes or so. And it's always going to be a house in the suburbs or something slightly larger. Nothing that deviates too much. Let's think of it this way. Think back to history class when it comes to things like siege warfare. You have your early walls, which were made out of stone and they were just kept high. After all, you don't want those pesky siege towers and siege ladders to get past them. Then, as time went on, walls became thicker, and in some cases, like the Chinese city walls, really good at being armored and repelling artillery fire. I mean, even the Japanese had an issue hitting it with World War II era artillery. Meanwhile, in Europe, they had the Bastion Fortress, which had lower walls that absorbed artillery shots, much like the Chinese city walls. And then eventually it evolved. Bastions became outdated, polygonal fortresses armed to the teeth with artillery, with plenty of smaller fortresses surrounding it, defending it, so that people would have to take, well, one fortress at a time. Then we had massive trench networks that tore through entire countrysides. Home Alone isn't that different in that regard. We started out in a home in suburbia, then we grew to the entire city of New York, and then, unlike actual warfare, we just devolved back towards suburbia, trying to recapture the energy of the first. Unlike what we actually do in warfare, which we have trench networks running through entire lengths of countrysides. Ahem, Ukraine. Could you imagine if we got a Home Alone movie set anywhere else? Like, I don't know, a bunch of kids were defending a shopping mall. I mean, really, kids should be riding on a mop cart and then chasing the designated villains down the escalator that is going in the opposite direction. Do something more than what we're just trying to do and recapture the energy of the first. But enough of what the franchise should have done versus what it actually did do. Let's dig into Home Sweet Home Alone. We open with an open house. These are the Mackenzies, a couple who are on some hard times. Jeff has lost his job while Pam can't make enough money to just keep their house, so they need to sell it. Now, here's the Mercer family, with Max desperately wanting to use the bathroom because he just had 6 sodas. What better place to use than an open house? So we get this conversation. One of the creepy dolls catches Max's attention, and he does put it back. The dolls are going to be important. So the Mackenzie kids come home with Jeff and Pam trying to hide the fact they're going to lose their home. You know, kids. Kids like good surprises. Nice, happy surprises, like birthday presents, or you coming to their actual recital out of your busy day. I don't think not telling them and then just telling them at the absolute last minute is going to make them feel any better. You're trying to spare feelings, but the conservation of suckiness principle says there's a limited amount of suckiness. Do you want that over time, or do you want it all at once? And seriously, these parents really are really bad at making decisions. So back to Max. You get the drill. Large family is about to have a flight for Christmas vacation. We'll give this scene props for one thing. I really wanted to yell at every single kid in this scene as if I was channeling in my middle school substitute teacher energy. So, the Mackenzie family, what are they up to? Well, the doll from earlier is plot relevant because it turns out to be a super rare mistake that is worth over 200K. So, Jeff thinks that the Mercer boy stole it, but when he gets to the house, he finds that everyone has essentially taken off. Guess who got left home alone? Max. So, you get the antics about being home alone and what that entails. Pam and Jeff are our wet bandits for this film. I completely disagree with this decision. It's hard to deal with the bumbling Horace and Jasper type bandits that were Marv and Harry, or the actual Horace and Jasper, because they did get disposed of by slapstick by like the same writer of the original Home Alone and the 101 Dalmatians adaptation in the 90s. But this is a struggling couple who want to save their home. And when you take into account this came out in 2021, only a year after the uncertainty of people losing their homes during an economic crisis brought about by the madness that was 2020 was an actual threat, can we really call them evil? Sure, they do break into someone's home, but A, legal does not imply moral, and B, this is a narrative where you bend legality and logic in order to make some kind of sense. But we're supposed to feel some catharsis for when they get hurt. Oh, and in a cameo, Buzz McAllister from the original Home Alone goes to check in on them. They successfully trick Buzz into leaving. Meanwhile, Max's family, they make me cringe. Lines like first world problems and what is this 1993 reek of trying way too hard, it's a consistent problem with this film. I skipped it earlier, but they were watching not they, the Mercer family, but actually Jeff and Pam, the Mackenzie family. They were watching the version of something Kevin watched from the original, except it was an Alien remake, and in universe, it's an Alien remake. Only for Jeff to say, I don't know why they're trying to remake the classics, they're never as good as the original. Like, the jokes write themselves. So, speaking of the original, this movie says Kevin grew up to own the McAllister home alarm system. And that's a joke I can get behind, mainly because it sounds like Kevin is so vindictive that he's reminding his relatives every single time they left him home alone. Not once, but twice. And the fact that he now owns a home security system is just the icing on the cake. This joke I can deal with. What I cannot deal with is Max. He goes up to St. Thomas Church and tries to steal from a toy drive. This kid should be visited by 3 spirits. So that night, the 2 dolts bumble about. Okay, their stupidity makes them less sympathetic somehow, even though their motives are really sympathetic. And of course, Max ices the roads so that they could crash. I mean, really? The icy walkways and roads is probably the most overplayed joke in this entire franchise. They also do the burning feet. And, well, driving a pushpin into someone's finger is just. Okay, I'm gonna be real here. The antics and pranks here, they're not great. So it turns out it's a whole big misunderstanding. Max doesn't have the doll, so everything we just saw was pointless nonsense. So Max stays with the Mackenzies while his family tries to head back from Tokyo, and the doll is actually in the hands of a side character related to the Mackenzies. Oh, and he does reunite with his mother, blah blah blah, good terms with the Mackenzies, blah blah blah, happy ending, blah blah blah. This movie sucked. The conflict between Max and the Mackenzie family is ultimately pointless, and even if it wasn't pointless, we want these 2 to get hurt. Are we really rooting for these 2 to get hurt? In a better written movie, they would be the heroic underdog. They just want to save their house. The Wet Bandits stole from people in the original and tried to kill Kevin in the sequel. These 2 are trying to save their house, and they have kids. I really don't want to see them get hurt, even if a lot of it is them being stupid dolts. And when they recycle lines from the original, it doesn't make them feel like people who had it coming. It makes them feel pathetic. And the actual antics are just so pedestrian by the standards of Home Alone. I mean, we don't even get an over-the-top electrocution scene like what Marv got in Home Alone 2. Hell, I don't even think a rope got cut that sent these 2 dolts into the side of the house like the original did. In terms of acting, whenever Archie Yates acts off of any other cast members, I think he can do well, but he's no Macaulay Culkin when it comes to actually holding scenes alone. Macaulay Culkin could hold the Home Alone scenes very well and very convincingly. This, you don't. I liked Archie Yates well enough in Jojo Rabbit, but not here. Then again, given the script he had to work with, I can't blame him. The script's attempts at humor are just unfunny, like LOL, we're modern. No, no, you're just inept. It's a rehash of the original without any of the charm of the original, even down to declawing the villains and the booby traps. Like, no. You can't declaw a Home Alone booby trap. You can't declaw the villains. You want them to be evil, but you want them to be so evil to such an extent that you kinda feel sorry for them, even though they're horrific people. And it reinforces my earlier concept of the suburbia Home Alone house has been played out. Do some Home Alone elsewhere, like a mall, or a private school, or a bastion fortress. This movie fundamentally misunderstands what made the original great. It declaws the villains to the point that watching them get hurt is uncomfortable. The antics are not even interesting. The slapstick is actually toned down. It's just not pleasant to watch, which is probably the worst insult I can give to any given Home Alone movie. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.